I have to thank, first of all, Pablo. We discussed with Pablo in Lincoln University in November 19 of this presentation, and today is the day to do that. Before starting, I wish to thank my colleagues, John Finn and Brendan Oran from Ireland, and Guy Lagrange, a French guy who is making a PhD in Ireland with John Finn. The title of my presentation incitates us to move from Africa to temperate lowland, but I think that according to the EVA presentation, the problem is always the same, is to better use grass and grassland in general and to do the best with ruminants. And my topic around challenges and opportunity for the future in pasture-based dairy systems for temperate lowlands. As you know, we are in a context with many challenges. The first one we have is to respond to the high food demand in the world. And we know that notably in China, with the higher power of money, they demand a lot of food. And if the occidental North Hemisphere population decrease a little bit animal consumption globally, we know due to the increasing of the population and the increasing of the demand of high population countries like China and India, the demand in the world will be more for animal product in the future. But in face to this demand, we have also a high environmental pressure. I have just highlighted three aspects of this environmental pressure. First of all, concern all the population in the world is the climate change. And this is one of the most important challenges we have to solve in the future, or we have to combine. I can't, not exactly what, if we can solve now, but we have to combine with. Luckily, we have also other environmental problems, like on the picture, the development of algae in Brittany due to the nitrate losses. And also, we know that there is a lot of ecosystemic services demand in the world. Consequently, the problem is, can we match these a priori opposite requirements between the high food demand, who incitate all the producer, all the breeder to enhance the production, and the high environmental pressure, who has an incitation of extensification. Let me start with banalities, in fact, but these banalities will help us for the rest of the presentation. We can say that grassland are for ruminants and ruminants are for grassland. And in fact, we are lucky with this because that will help us to reduce the competition between ruminants feeding and human feeding. And grass can help us to do and to transform in interesting animal products like milk, meat, or also wool. The problem is, can we improve this win-win duo? Because we know that in the past, notably in the North Hemisphere, we have a huge intensification on grassland. And this is a consequence, first of all, of a high level of end fertilization utilization on grass. And one question is, can we be more efficient with less inputs? The objective is, in fact, to improve the win-win duo. And the paper tried to explain how we hope to be able to do, we can do that with three aspects. The first one is the animal, how to select animal with adequate capacities for grazing and for grass utilization. How can we improve the efficiency of grass with less inputs, with multi-species pasture, introducing legumes in grassland? And how to help farmers to move in the less intense system, making enough money to enhance market signals and stimulate partnership for ecosystem service payments. This is a plan I will develop now, but it will be, as you will see, just a flyover due to the fact we have few minutes, but the essential is in the paper. The first thing is about the animal, and I will just use the dairy cow as an example, but this is the same also for the suckling cows. In fact, we have to find the grass for the cow, for the grass-based system. And a lot of experiments has demonstrated in the last year in Normandy, but also in Ireland and in New Zealand, that the high genetic merit for milk are not compatible with high level of grass grazed, because the energy demand is so high that grass is not enough, and also because when you race for milk productivity, in fact, you lose other capacities like breeding and reproduction performance. And we have probably, for grass-based system, to reorient the genetic selection with other focus like fertility, health resistance, capacity to work, and longevity. We think that they are probably more important for grass-based systems than the high genetic merit for milk. And this option has been taken in 20 years ago in Ireland with my colleague Delaby, and he has demonstrated in a very nice experiment, Next Generation, that this is effectively efficient to push selection on fertility and health resistance more than milk for the grass-based system. And other thing is to adapt the breeding season, to adapt the management of this type of cows according to the grass availability and the erratic grass growth profile. Just a short slides to explain the key role of the breeding season in this type of systems. You have the year from January to December. This is in North Hemisphere. And in green, this is the grazing period, the grazing season. But sometimes we have to keep in mind that in some area, there is drought period risk, and we have to combine with that. Traditionally, we promote the spring calving or spring lambing to match the animal demand with the grass availability, and consequently, we produce milk. The cows cycle the lambs during the grass growth profile. But we have also to imagine other practices, other breedings. And for example, we have proposed a few years ago in France, due to the fact that the growth period risk is high in south of France, to split the herd in two sub-herd and to have two calving season, two breeding season, separate from 6 months, to have the opportunity to reduce the animal demand during the poor season of forage, winter, of course, like in the spring calving season, but also to reduce the demand of food in summer because there is drought period risk. Consequently, you can reduce the stocking rate around the farm with dairy cow and continue to graze with poor grass growth because half of the herd is dry. This is just an example of intelligent practices to be more inadequate with the season in some part of France or in the south like Spain, Italy or so. Another aspect now is pasture. And this is just a very nice picture of an experiment done by John Finn and Guylain Grange in Johnson Castle. They have demonstrated again that plant diversity helps robustness. They have compared different combination of grass, legume, and herbs, like you can see on the triangle. And the very recent results confirm the interest of mixing. As you can see on the triangle, the highest productivity was, in fact, when all the rain is fed on the paddock, but with 9 weeks drought, the productivity is declining, but stay higher than a 300 kg of nitrogen on pure lowland perennial. In this situation, the mixed sward were fertilized with half of the level of the pure perennial, and the production is all the time higher. Now, that have been demonstrated in Switzerland in the past, for example, but this is really interesting to highlight the fact that the plant diversity with legumes, but also with herbs, can reduce the N inputs, to reduce the N mineral utilization, has a nice efficiency in terms of less emission, less losses of nitrogen in air and in water, and produce grass with less invasion, but also with high N content. And this is interesting for the ruminant nutrition. The mixity, diversity is interesting for grassland, and finally is also interesting for the animal nutrition. And just the last aspect developed in the paper is the fact that when farmers try to develop this opportunity, they have to be helped. And for that, we have imagined 3 levels of helps. The first one in Europe is the Common Agriculture Policy. And we have huge discussion at the moment for the reorienting subsidies to better assume the Green Deal recommendation. We have huge debate, but that is going in the good sense for the farmer who wants to apply disintensification. We observe also in Europe a lot of private-public contracts who are developing to promote diverse demand, and the most famous is the water protected area. The farmers receive money to reduce the productivity, to increase the introduction of legumes and the diversity in the pasture, and reducing N nitrogen, because that's protect the watershed in fact. And the last one, well known in Europe, but it's also because we have higher power. This is to take the opportunity of the market signal for better price, and local product at the moment with good image are really promoted. And the most famous story we can say of the 20 last year is probably the development of the organic farming. This is largely due to the fact the price are higher because the consumer are ready to pay for other things that only the food. They want to know how you produce and what are the consequences of your practices in the environment. Just to conclude, we have resumed all these aspects in a synthetic figure who start the paper. As you can see, we move on the x-axis from intensive management to extensive management. And we know that when you go at the right of the slides, the nutrient efficiency is increasing. And if you push too far, time to decrease, but the biodiversity is increasing. The results of that is well known. The production is diminishing, and without compensation, the profit is declining. That's why a lot of farmers are thrilled to move to this aspect, but we can imagine that private or public help can improve and stimulate this movement. You can read more in the invited paper, and I have to just thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for different questions.
Thanks so much for that, Luke. I'm actually a dairy farmer myself, so I find that this really interesting, and the topic of diversifying our pastures in New Zealand has become a really sort of talked about thing at the moment. First question would be, have you considered the profitability of sort of diversifying these dairy systems, and bearing in mind, like in New Zealand, we don't have government subsidies or anything, so I understand that that's sort of different over in your part of the world, but Do you think, have you done any work on this? Do you know whether there is what the profit margin is compared to less intensive systems?
Yeah, this is a big challenge, you're right. In fact, without subsidies, if you move in disintensification, if you promote low inputs, you should gain with low inputs more than you lost in terms of productivity of milk. And the big problem is how to compensate. If the money you keep in your pocket because you know you reduce the inputs are equivalent at least of the milk you don't produce because you have less stocking rate, because you have less intense animals and so on, you are a winner. But it's not so easy. That's why in Europe, we try to promote and to help at the start of the change. We try to help the farmer with some subsidies. But you are right. It's more difficult probably if you have not enough in terms of gain with less inputs according to the productivity declining. One thing is, can the market, the free market, stimulate that because the price are higher? That's a big question. And all will depend of the consumer demand. If the consumer are ready to pay, for example, 5 to 10% more, I think it's possible too. It's not many money. A lot of money will be useful for the car or for the iPhone. I am not anxious with that. But if they are ready to pay a little bit more for better practices, and they should have explained for that, that's probably the key of the problem. We have in the last 14, 15 years in the north in the hemisphere north, in the developing country, I don't know if you can say that, all the time tend to diminish, to reduce the food prices, to keep money for other things, for holidays, for driving, for iPhone. This is the best, for the best example. And if the consumer are ready to pay a little bit more, the food, we have to change a little bit. That's probably easier for the farmer to reduce inputs and to move to better practices and less aggressive practices. But that's a challenge we have, and probably you more than me, as you are so young.
Oh, thanks for that. Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, Luc, and the Northern Hemisphere view. If I can rather weakly summarize the New Zealand situation, where you have a dairy industry that's very market oriented, and as Anita said, is not subsidized at all virtually. And the New Zealand, so therefore what you do is your last comments about how the market's changing and what incentives and pricing that may offer is obviously very significant. But I just noticed that you did not touch on the role of regulation, because that's where the effect and change in New Zealand is so significant. There are no subsidies, but there's an array of government regulation in terms of controlling of nitrogen outputs, coming in terms of the carbon emissions, etc. And that sort of dominates our thinking and responses here. Perhaps you'd just like to comment about the role of regulation in the Northern Hemisphere.
No, I agree with you. In Europe, we have also huge regulation. For example, the nitrate directive limits the N applied. But we know that these regulations are always discussed and rediscussed to limit the effect. And we know also that if strong regulation, efficient regulation wants to have positive results, it's better if you help the farmer to do. And to help the farmer, you can have knowledge transfer, better practices learning, and so on. But you can also incite with a little bit of money. So, in fact, I agree with you. We have the two lengths in in Europe, we have subsidies, but you can't have subsidies if you don't make something to improve the environment practices. Now, this is like a sugar for the baby.
Thank you.
And that can be used also in New Zealand. If the consumer push better practices for environment, they should be able to accord subsidies to the farmer to move. The transition is really important.
Isn't it true as well that sort of regulations are used to create changes in the short term, whereas sort of subsidies are used to sort of create change over a longer period of time?
No, traditionally, subsidies are like a starter. And after that, they learn to practice, they are more efficient, and subsidies are declining or are moving for another step. But we know that the transition is always more difficult. And if you can help farmer with, you can have direct subsidies, but you can have also indirect subsidies. When you pay somebody for a knowledge transfer in one direction, you have also efficient aspects.
So
I think there is a lot of opportunities, in fact.
Yeah, so just moving on a little bit, what sort of plant species are you considering? So I'm sorry, I haven't read your paper, but like in New Zealand, complex, like more than sort of 20 odd plant species, is there a magic number or a magic combination?
Traditionally, in Europe, we have also, of course, Peña raygrass, because this is probably the most famous grass for graze in the world. And we keep all the time Peña raygrass, but we try to add legumes like wild clover or wild clover. And we have in Brittany, for example, a lot of mixed pasture with wild clover and Peña raygrass. This is a very nice wedding. But if you want more than 2 species, you can have a red clover, but red clover is only 2 or 3 first years after it disappeared. You can have also hybrid clover, more interesting. And in terms of form or herb, we have, I think, like in New Zealand, plantain and chicory. Plantain is probably easier to manage. Chicory is difficult to manage, and we have to be careful with chicory. And in terms of grass, I say Peña raygrass, but we have also Timothy. Timothy is interesting. And sometimes, due to drought summer, we had skogfood, and festuca. But keep in mind that Peña raygrass is always in the sowing pasture because it helps so much for grazing that we can't eliminate it, Peña raygrass. But it needs companion. That was the experiment of Guillain in Johnson Castle. He kept always Peña raygrass, but he had some legumes. And in my mind, the challenge we have with this mixed pasture is to maintain legumes. This is a big challenge. How to better manage to keep legumes and to limit the erratic variation of legumes contribution between years. That is, in my mind, the most difficult aspect we have to solve, and it's not for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Yes, sorry about that, Luc. Yes, so Luc, nice talk. I'm coming from UK and I'm aware of quite a lot of what's happening in Republic of Ireland. So I'm not a daring person, but how much do you think these grazing technicalities are lost behind the sort of bigger trends in dairying of the loss of small-scale farmers and the sort of large-scale dairying structure that's coming along, where some things like zero grazing becomes the modus by which these big farms can work, and robotic milking, all that sort of big scale things, which have been driven by people issues rather than that sort of nice thing. So the sort of those other trends, how do they fit in with your story?
No, you're right. And to be honest, in my mind, what we observed at the moment in France, but I think in Europe, it's the development of two types of dairying. Large herd, indoor, robot, maize or grass silage all the year for the first one, and with large herd and a combination of 2 or 3 farms together and so on. And the second one is a grass-based system of dairying. And I see that probably in the future, the both will continue, and because there is different market for this type of dairying system. But I agree with you. Enlarging the herd, move to the robot and so on is unfavorable for grazing, definitely.